The lesson text I'm preaching from this evening, I asked Charles because he saw the title, and he says, Asa's feet? And I said, yeah. And so I said, it's something I've never preached on in 20-something years. I've never preached on Asa's feet. And I don't know, and as I reflected back on it, I've never heard a preacher preach on it. It is an interesting story in Chronicles. And so it's about King Asa. Now you say, well, I don't know if I even know who King Asa was, but he's a king that really started out really pretty good. But what happened eventually, though, he sort of loses track of himself and begins trusting in himself more than in God. And so Romans chapter 15, verse 4, I don't know why I always feel like I need to do this passage whenever I preach from the Old Testament. I think because I grew up listening to a preacher who had a very negative impression of the Old Testament. He always said that stuff is dry as dust. And so I sort of grew up with that impression. I feel like I need to do almost an apology before doing the Old Testament. But Romans chapter 15, verse 4, so things written aforetime, written for our learning, that we through the patience and comfort of Scriptures might have hope. And so we have here, about 1,000 years before Jesus was born, David ruled. And so we want to put the chronology of things. Jesus was born about 1,000 years after David reigned. And so you remember David reigned, and then his son Solomon took over. And David was a warrior king. There was a lot of fighting that took place. In fact, David lived in a nice house made of cedar, and he wanted to build a house for God, a place for the Ark of the Covenant. And God says, David, really, I can't let you do this, or your hands are sort of stained with blood. You've been a warrior king, but I'll let your son Solomon do that. But David sort of laid out the plan. Solomon fulfilled them. But Solomon reigned, and really Solomon had the good benefit of having a relatively peaceful reign. There were maybe some things going on, but more than likely he lived for the most part in a pretty peaceful reign. Part of it was that David established such a dominant kingdom, a dynasty, if you will, that Solomon sort of benefited from that. But when Solomon died, his son split the kingdom in half. We have the northern kingdom, which was known as Israel, and the southern kingdom, which was known as Judah. All the tribes of Judah were simply the tribes of Benjamin and tribe of Judah. All the rest of the tribes went with the northern kingdom. And so here we have the division, and Rehoboam was the ruler of the southern kingdom, or Judah, and that was Solomon's son Rehoboam. His brother Jeroboam was in the northern kingdom, and so they split the kingdom in half, and they reigned at the same time, or during part of it at the same time. Now, when Solomon died, his son Abijah became king. Now, Abijah was sort of he was a scoundrel. Okay, he wasn't too good. Okay, he reigned just a short time. He only reigned 3 years, and then when he died, his son Asa became king. Now, Asa was a king, and he reigned for 41 years. He reigned for a good long reign. And really what was sort of impressive with Asa is that he was a pretty good guy to start out with. In fact, Chronicles chapter 14, verses 1 through 4, Asa did what was good and right in the eyes of the Lord his God. For he moved the altars of the foreign gods and the high places, and broke down the sacred pillars, and cut down the wooden images. And he commanded Judah to seek the Lord God of their fathers, and to observe the law and the commandments. So, if you remember back, Solomon had all the wives and concubines, I was reminded, as I said that, of the little boy one time. His mother said, "Why did you study about?" And Bible study this morning, he said, "We studied about Solomon, his wives, and his cucumber vines." But it was about his wives and his concubines. And so Solomon had all his wives, and they led him astray. And now his children are led astray. Abijah was led astray. They began putting all these high places, and they'd have these places of cult worship. They worshiped God and goddesses, particularly fertility god and goddesses. Now, when Asa came in, he got rid of all that. He said, no, wait a minute, no, my people are going to follow their God Jehovah. And he got rid of it, and he commanded them, you observe the laws. You know, we had the purity laws, the food laws, the observational days that they had to do, and the commandment. You do this. And so Asa got started off good, but Asa, like any of us, he had challenges in his life. He hadn't been reigning too awful long. And then the Ethiopian ruler came out against him. Now, Zerah the Ethiopian came out against him with an army of 1,000,000 men and 300 chariots. And he came to Marishah. So Asa went out against him, and they set the troops in the battle array in the valley of Zapatha at Marishah. So here we have this ruler of the Ethiopian with an army of 1,000,000 strong. Not to mention 300 chariots. Okay, and so he comes to Marishah. He comes up against Asa, the ruler of the southern kingdom. Now, if you read in the text there, you'll soon discover that Asa had an army of about 300,000. So his men were outnumbered over 3 to 1. 3 Ethiopians to one of his. So, I mean, he was facing some pretty bad odds. Okay, it wasn't looking good for the home team. Okay, it was looking pretty sad. Okay, but you know, God sort of sometimes steps in those sad situations, those challenging situations. Then Asa his heart was tender toward God, and so he trusted in God. I mean, I guess when you look at the odds, you know, 1,000,000 of their guys and their chariots to my guys, you know, it's pretty bad odds. And so Asa cried out to the Lord his God and said, "Lord, it is nothing for you to help, whether with many or with those who have no power. Help us, O Lord our God, for we rest on you, and in your name we go up against this multitude. O Lord, you are our God. Do not let man prevail against you." So really, it's sort of interesting. Remember David on the field, okay, as he's going out to fight Goliath, you know, and what does David say about this fight? The battle is not ours, it's the Lord's. And so this is like his great-great-great-grandson saying, guess what, God? You can do this. I'm sure he had heard stories told about his great-great-grand. I think I've got great-great-grandfather David, and how he just the man of old and the man of renown, and what he had done, killing the giant Goliath, and all the things he did. And he said, "Listen, you know, God, you can do this. It doesn't matter how, God, with many or with those who have no power. Help us, O Lord, for we rest on you, and in your name we go against the multitude. O Lord, you are our God, and let not man prevail against you." More or less, it says, God, this is your fight. Don't let man be victors here. Let it be you. And so he was outnumbered 3 to 1. I mean, over 3 to 1, really. A million to 300,000. However, so the Lord struck the Ethiopians for Asa and Judah, and the Ethiopians fled. If you read on in that chapter, Asa he went through the land. He took spoil. I mean, it was like anywhere he went, his people just sort of fell before him. Asa, he brought all his treasure back to Jerusalem and put in the temple. He was victorious because he trusted in God. And so we have this king, and I mean, he's sort of rocking along, and so he sets the reforms, chapter 15, if you read all that, and he says, listen, we've not done enough reform. We've not done enough restoration. We need to even go further. And he actually begins to even cleanse the nation more and more of its idolatry. And in fact, it goes up against the queen and says, you know, hey, you're an idolater. You know, I'm removing you. You know, he does great things in his day because of his desire to serve the Lord and desire to show the Lord, you know, that he had trust in him. You know, sometimes we give young people our bad rap. We sometimes attribute foolishness to them or foolhardiness to them or impulsivity to them. And we sometimes do that. But this is a case in where Asa was a better young man than he was an old man. He appeared to have a greater grasp of God and God's will for him and how God was sovereign and control. He seems to have that as a young man more than he does as an old man. And I don't know, and maybe he just got tired from all the fighting. Maybe he's got tired from all the struggles. But for whatever it was, he sort of loses his way as an older gentleman. But the next several years during the kingdom of Judah, it was peaceful. In fact, you know, it was almost like, I don't think they had newspapers back then. I don't know when they first started publishing newspapers. Maybe Keith could tell us, but you know, if they had a newspaper, nothing to say bad today. You know, can you imagine picking a newspaper? Nothing bad to say. The weather's sunny, the weather's not. You know, nothing bad to say. Could you imagine having that kind of news? But it was almost that way for 35 years. They had it pretty good. There were no big invading armies. They didn't have a whole lot going on. He was doing spiritual reform of his nation. I mean, it looked pretty good during that period of time for a long time. But then, in the 36th year, it's almost as if Asa got too full of himself and began to lead him to trust himself more than God. In fact, tensions began to arise between the two kingdoms, the northern and southern kingdoms. And so Baasha, and that's how I pronounce it, it may be pronounced differently, but Baasha, he was king now of the northern kingdom. You know, he would have been a cousin to him, a cousin to him by now. But Baasha is now the king of the northern kingdom, and Asa is king of the southern kingdom. And they're beginning to have some tension between the two, maybe some jealousy or whatever. And so Baasha, he sort of fixed it because they were in the south, and so Baasha had larger territorial, larger territory, and of course more tribes. So he fixed it more or less where he was sort of pinned in. And so he came up against Judah and built Ramah. He built a fortified city called Ramah, that he might let none go in or none come out to Asa, king of Judah. Okay, it almost reminds you of a game kids would play, something like that. You know, just getting in someone's way where they can't get through, just sort of aggravating them. And he had him sort of pinned in where no other one, so any trade or commerce or anybody he wanted to have connect, they had to go through Ramah first. And so he had him sort of pinned in. And Asa was feeling the pressure of that, And so he does something very, very foolish. This was a man who trusted in God when the armies were 1,000,000 to 300,000. Over 3 to 1. This is a man who just sort of put his faith and trust in God, and suddenly, later in life, he just sort of thinks, well, I need to help God out, or maybe I need to do something. And he does something very, very, very foolish. Asa makes a drastic mistake. This is a man who would say he had done spiritual reform. He does some great things. Later, Josiah will do some great things. But this was a man who just sort of lost his way later in life. He makes a drastic mistake. First Chronicles, let's just say 2 Chronicles, chapter 16, 2 through 3. Then Asa brought silver and gold from the treasuries of the house of the Lord and the king's house, and sent to Ben-Hadad, king of Syria, who dwelt in Damascus, saying, Let there be a treaty between you and me, as there was between my father and your father. Seeing I have set you silver and gold, come, break your treaty with Baasha, king of Israel, so he would withdraw from me. So basically what he does, he goes to the God's house and takes treasure that belonged to God and offers it to this king in this other country. He took gold and silver out of his own house and said, okay, I'm going to pay you a bribe. Now you break your treaty with Baasha, so he'll quit hemming me in. So he'll quit backing me in the corner. You break your treaty. And he said, we're going to go back to my father and your father. They had a treaty, of course we know Abijah wasn't the best of men. And he said, he had a treaty with you. So basically he robs the house of God to pay this foreign king off. It's really a sad thing for a man who appeared to have such great faith at one time. Instead of giving his petition before God, he says, God, I'm hemmed in. Can you help me out here? God, my cousins give me a hard time. Could you do something about it? He sets in plan of his own. And he robs from God's house and pays him off. Now, living in Judah at this time, we don't know what the man's name is. He's simply known as a seer, S-E-E-R, a seer. One of the shows that Tammy and I got watching was the Viking show. It was on the History Channel. I don't know anyone watching that. But they had a guy on there in the community that was a seer, and he was some ugly cuss. He was like his nose was falling off. He was really, really an ugly person and stuff like that. And I don't know why, but every time he went to the seer on this TV show, he had to lick his hand. I don't know, it was a custom or whatever, but he looked pretty cruddy and something like that. He looked like he had leprosy or something. Pretty rough looking character, But this seer, we just don't know a lot about him. We just know that's who he was, He saw things. He knew things. We might say it was something that maybe akin to a prophet. And so he's a seer in the land. And he sort of sees what's happening. And so when Asa does this, Well, we do. I'm sorry. Hanai. I said we didn't have his name. We do not have his name. Hanai the seer came to Asa, king of Judah, and said to him, because you have relied on the king of Syria and have not relied on the Lord your God, therefore the army of the king of Syria has escaped from your hand. He said, do you think you had them under control? You don't have him under control. He's escaped from your hand. It's sort of interesting that when I was reading this and putting the lesson together, I'm thinking, wow, Syria was in the news back 3,000 years ago. And this is the same Syria that's in the news today all the time. Same Damascus, the same city. These are the same players still at play. And it's sort of interesting to see how we're still dealing with the consequences of things way back. And guess what? Guess who Syria today hates? They hate the descendants of Asa. They hate the Jews. And so we still have these problems. I mean, 3,000 years later, we still got these issues. But he says, listen, Hannah said, listen, because you trusted in that and not God, you've lost it all. And so that's eventually what happens is that he, you know, and then the seer goes on to say, the seer remembers, he said, were the Ethiopians and the Lubim not a huge army with very many chariots and horsemen? Yet because you relied on the Lord, He delivered them into your hand. Remember, God struck them and delivered them to your hand. For the eyes of the Lord run to and fro throughout the whole earth to show Himself strong on behalf of those whose heart is loyal to Him. In this you have done foolishly, therefore from now on you shall have wars. Can you imagine? A peaceable kingdom for 35 years, no fighting, no wars, you know, nothing going on. We as a country, you know, a little over 200 years, you know, and so like we've had some kind of conflict or war going on the entire time we've been around. I don't know that we've gone 35 years without something going on. But he said, because you did this foolish thing the rest of your life, it's not going to be good. It's going to be wars. Because you didn't trust in God. Because you put your faith and trust in a king, a Syrian king, and not in God. But the idea that for the eyes of the Lord run to and fro throughout the whole earth to show Himself strong on behalf of those whose heart is loyal to Him. That's a very important verse for us to appreciate and understand. So what happens? Asa lost his way. His faith has wavered. And he really trusts himself and others more than he did God. And this wasn't a young man. This was a man of some age. And despite all the fight and all the reform he did and all the good things he did, he just sort of loses it. He loses his way along the way. You know, Romans chapter 8:28. Christians are not without hardship. People who follow God, people who follow Christ, you're going to have hardship. Jesus said to His disciples, in this world you will have trouble, but be of good cheer. I've overcome the world. So we're told it's not like surprise. We know it's going to be that. But you know, Asa sort of maybe forgot that sometimes God shows up in difficulties. Sometimes God shows up in hardship. Sometimes God shows up in an army of 1 million men coming down on you, so God can show up to show you how a small group can overcome a big group. Sometimes God has to be the young man who takes 5 stones to up against the giant in the army and victorious. You see, sometimes God needs those opportunities to show who He is. And when we run ahead of Him and try to use our own reason, God misses out. Romans chapter 8:28. And we know that all things work together for good to those who love God and those who are called according to His purpose. You know, that situation with Baasha may have been just one opportunity that God says, listen, let me work this out for you. When I was reading the text and stuff like that, remember they were relatives. They would have been cousins. Maybe God was wanting to have that tension to exist, or maybe to reunite the kingdom. I sometimes wondered, you know, maybe God was having that tension, them coming in contact with each other, to maybe eventually reunite the kingdom somehow. I don't know what God had planned, But I know that Asa's behavior in all this was not pleasing to God, because God allowed them to be destroyed, and the treaty was not honored. How did Asa respond to this confrontation? Did he respond in humility? Yeah, I'm sorry. God, forgive me. God, I messed up. No. And Asa was angry with the seer and put him in prison, for he was enraged at him because of this. And Asa oppressed some of the people at that time. So not only did Asa get mad at the seer, but he got mad at the people, and in fact, he even punished his own people. I guess I wondered, as I was putting the lesson together, is this not like the kick dog thing? I'm mad at everyone else for kicking the dog. What's going on here? But Asa sort of loses his way. Now, here we get down to the part where the lesson begins to make sense. You say, listen, you're sitting here talking about Asa's feet, and you've gone for 20 minutes or 25 minutes, and you've not once mentioned the dude's feet. What's the connection here? Well, one, he never learned he never repented. He didn't repent. He didn't. I'm sorry. There's no biblical record of him saying, I messed up. It's like he sort of put his back up, and when someone spoke on God's behalf, it just made me mad. He wasn't humbled. He just got mad. He did not learn from his hardship to trust in God. In fact, Chronicles, the last part of it, 2 Chronicles chapter 16, verse 12. And in the 39th year of his reign, Asa became diseased in his feet, and his malady was severe. Yet in his disease, he did not seek the Lord, but the physicians. I don't know. I actually got on Bing and looked at some picture of diseased feet, and I was afraid that some squeamish folks might have been offended, because there are some pretty nasty diseases of the feet out there. I mean, some pretty rank looking stuff, And I don't know what he had. I don't know if he had gout or he had something, but for whatever he had a severe disease of his feet. Is it symbolic, perhaps? That he can't stand again on his own? That he trusted in his own ability to stand up against the king, that God says, I'll show you what standing looks like. You can't do it no more. I'll disease your feet so you cannot stand up against no man again. So, in this even, he didn't ask God for healing. He didn't say, God, I got this bad problem here, and, God, could you do something for it? He didn't trust in the Lord, but he trusted in his physicians. In fact, someone need to fact check me on that, but I believe the name Asa, translated in Hebrew, means physician. And so here Asa's approaching himself, and he still won't lean to God. And he winds up dying a few years later, and he's buried with his father. He did not turn to God. Instead, he trusted in his physicians more than God. I don't think this is Bible saying don't go to the doctor. You go to the doctor, but you trust in the Lord. You get counsel, you get advice, but you trust in the Lord. You make the best decisions you can, but still you trust in the Lord. And in fact, Scripture, as we read earlier, for the eyes of the Lord run to and fro throughout the whole earth to show himself strong on behalf of those whose heart is loyal to him. That's what the seer said. That's what Hannah said. God's looking for opportunities. God's searching for opportunities to show himself strong for those who are loyal to him. I don't know what hardship you're dealing with right now. Hopefully you're in a season of peace. Maybe you're having one of Asa's 35-year reign seasons. I hope so for you. But if you have a hardship right now, how do you know that this isn't God saying, just stay loyal to me? Just stay faithful to me? And when the odds are 3-1 or 4-1 or odds are stacked against you, let me show me in that. Proverbs chapter 3 verse 6 says, in all your ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct your path. So here we have a situation of poor King Asa. A man that just sort of started out strong. And I don't know what wore him down. I don't know what it was. Or maybe nothing wore him down. Maybe he just got sort of full of himself. Maybe he said, as the king, we've had 35 years of peace under my leadership. Maybe he just got so full of himself that thought it was all about him. And look what he had accomplished. Look what he had done. And we see it in politicians today. They take credit for anything good that happens and distance themselves from anything bad that happens. If something good happens, well, that happened under my reign. Something bad happened, that's the other guy's fault. that was there before I was. It's amazing sometimes how people will do that. So here we have tonight this lesson from the Old Testament that Paul says is written for our learning, that as we study it, as we search it, as we look into it, that we might have hope. Well, I think the takeaways are pretty simple. Young or old, trust in the Lord. Hardships are sometimes ways for God to show up. Hardships are sometimes ways for God to say, okay, let me be me. You remain faithful, you remain loyal to me, and let me be me. The seer Hananiah said, God is just looking for opportunities. God's searching to and fro to say, okay, here's a hard case, let me show up. I mean, that's something that we know that in Asa's life, had he just done that, had he just said, Lord, I got this problem with this cousin, and he's really got me in a corner. Can you do something with this? Maybe God could unite a broken kingdom. Or maybe God could have done something greater than Asa could have ever imagined God could have done. And poor Asa suffering at his feet, if he could just somehow said, God, I just trust in you. Regardless of what happens, I'll cut my feet off, I still trust in you. That wouldn't that have been a greater legacy for him to have left behind? Consider all the reform, all that he'd done his many years, all tearing down all the high places and getting rid of idolatry. Wouldn't that have been a greater legacy than to say, well, he became an old man, he quit trusting in God, and he died? There's a lesson there for us all, I think. To remain faithful, to remain loyal, to take our hardships as opportunities for God to show up. Romans 8:20, all things work together for good for those who love the Lord and called according to His purpose. I have to remind myself of that sometimes. That's one of my favorite verses, but sometimes I have to remind myself of that passage. If you're here tonight, maybe you need prayer of encouragement. Maybe there's someone tonight that's never obeyed the gospel. All things prepared. We have everything ready. Every time we use a baptistry up there, I'm just so impressed with the foresight of the elders and the design up there. It's just one of the best arrangements you could ever ask for. But if you're here tonight, we can assist you for any way. Won't you come as we stand and sing the song selected?